Gary, appreciate you taking the time to join this podcast. I'd love it if you could start me off with just a high level overview of what you're working on now and a bit about your experience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I'm working on now, there's a group of us that come together. First of all, I've got some fractional roles. I'm looking after, I'm a fractional CRO for a very forward-thinking FX savings platform called Monitor,
Mhm.
based out of Norway, which we're looking to take to market and scale out globally. I'm doing some work for a couple of very sharp, very innovative AI companies, doing some advisory work for them. I came out of Tidegraph around about April time, having done a turnaround. So yeah, I've got a number of different things I'm working on at the moment, and I think it's been an interesting journey. But what I wanted to do this year, I celebrated a couple of things. So I celebrated my 40th year end and my 160th quarter end, coincidentally. So
Wow.
my first startup was 1983, believe it or not, and that was in typesetting industry. We the typesetting industry at the time is like all things. Your experiences come from change, right? And
Hmm.
my experiences all come from watching an industry change from one place to another. The amount of change that I've seen in 40 years has been, quite incredible. Even from the point of view of when you had your first sales job, when I had my first sales job, you didn't choose, you had to choose your chair, your desk phone, and the color of your Vauxhall Calibra or whatever it was at the time, company car. No mobile phones, anything like that. Yes, I'm that old, right? So when we actually started WordStream, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have digital marketing, we didn't have any of those things. So what we had was a really good idea to actually save people 90% of their typesetting costs by getting them to do it themselves. And WordStream was born from a inch by an inch advertisement in the Exchange of Mark magazine, where we got 3,000 customers in 3 weeks.
Wow.
So we had to grow up, and then we did all those kind of like entrepreneurial things, like have to think on your feet, right? So we had to grow up because there's three of us getting this reprographic paper pumping through these machines 24 hours a day. So we had to get a production line. So we went out and we headhunted the entire team from the local Kentucky Fried Chicken and brought them in. And they were eternally grateful because we got them office jobs, and some of them went on to have very decent careers. It was
Hmm.
so that was a lot of fun. So, but the overriding factor of that business was the 92% net profit that we achieved. And I've been fighting to find that ever since. I like these KPIs. The way I'm made up, I'm very margin based for a sales leader. I'm not one of these that's 100% just go for growth at all costs and all that. I like to do sensible business, sustainable business, leave people in safe hands. I like to do the right thing by the company, and nothing that's I don't look for things that are going to be aesthetically pleasing for 5 minutes, and then and like 2 days later be full of remorse, right? I like to do things that are very straightforward, and ultimately I like to drive, the difficult. If you look at a matrix of difficulty of replacement and value add, I like both the customer and the people I'm working for to be in the top right hand corner with each other. So um, those are the sort of things that drive me forward and make me think on a daily basis. And then it's all about improvements, really. So I like to make improvements in sales processes. I use very simple KPIs to exit from one sales stage to another. But ultimately, I like to know if it takes 1,000 marketing qualified leads to get one deal. I don't work on the 1,000. I like to work on the one, because the one should be 10, and the 10 25, and the 25 should then be 50 from the same base. And it's those improvements that you look to make. So, sorry, that was a very long answer to a short question.
No, I appreciate that. And I think it flows quite nicely when you talk about improvements and the work that you do in your fractional roles. I'd love to understand from a foundational level, you start working with a new company, how do you diagnose the specific problems that they have and then work to make immediate changes?
I think that what I look for first is three things. So I want the people that I'm working with to know, or if they don't know, to find out really quickly which company is going to buy their product, who inside that company is going to become like their champion, going to bet their career on it because it's that compelling, and when do they get their money back, right? So I think that you need to be able to answer those three things, and you certainly need to set up an environment where the customer feels like they're going to get those three things. And I think that once you can actually do that, then you can start establishing things like the value proposition, and then you can start talking about, well, who are our target personas who are going to take advantage of this, and then you can look at you need to understand the scenarios where by doing what they're going to do with your product, how it differentiates from what they're doing now and how they do get their money back, and what's the route to that. So those are the key identification things that I do at the beginning. They lay the foundations for kind of the activities and the scripts that you write and the outreach and the marketing messages that you put out around those particular products and solutions. And that's to generate interest and create demand. That's the first thing. The second thing is I like people to feel that they can put a community around what they do. So a lot of the time, you come across people who've survived a problem so that they can create a solution for a problem, right?
Mhm.
So they've actually experienced something in their previous working life which they felt strongly enough about that they were going to put something together which actually solved that for other people. So if you can do that, and it's something that can be done for across a myriad of different situations, then you need to build a community around that. The best place to do that is obviously around social media and digital marketing and that sort of thing. And then the third thing, the next thing for me is making sure you've got that high level of repeatability. I always saw my kind of one of my mantras is there's only one thing worse than never selling anything, and that's selling it once, right? Because if you sell it once, you've got to support it forever, and after 3 years, you're losing money.
Mhm.
So how do you avoid that? Well, by doing what we've talked about before, that value proposition identification, knowing exactly why you exist, the persona that's going to actually be the champion, and recognize that they're going to get their money back, you can actually repeat that across the board. Two ways to do that: having a high level of repeatability of proposition, and the second thing, which has been kind of successful for me and people that have worked with me in several companies around, if you like, white labeling what you do. And if somebody's been successful, say 200 times with their proposition, if they can take advantage of yours, why not let them take it into their customers as well and share the success?
Mhm.
So partnering is very key at the beginning as well, and having a partner strategy, because you're using other people's resources to actually get you to market for the sake of a little bit of margin, but the success can be much higher.
I'd love to unpack all of that a bit because it's really interesting, specifically around developing that value proposition, defining the personas that would purchase your product or your service. What what is the work that needs to be done to ensure you have a solid strategy?
I think that you've got a couple of things. Why did you? So I always ask the same question. So why did you come here in the first place?
Hmm.
What point in time did you wake up in the morning and decide you had to do this? And it always starts from there, because it has to be if you like, a founder's vision or a team's vision, or a vision that something has to be solved. Value proposition needs to be able to you need to be able to define the problem, and then you need to actually understand what that problem means to the customer, what it means not to solve it, and what the benefits are from solving it. And you sit down and you work out and you identify all these things, and then you can actually start to put those together in the value proposition that you take forward.
Hmm.
That's one of the areas. And I mean, there are several other, if you like, uh, methods that have been applied in the past. I mean, I always like one of the things that Chris Topman put out as part of his posts, and he's got a whole catalogue of these decks and things, is the Sequoia pitch, the
Hmm.
original employer pitch, which is the 10 slides of how you need to get there and what you need to, I've got it all here. So the Sequoia Capital one is, purpose, problem, solution, why now, market size, competition, product, business model, the team, and financials. Those 10 slides.
Hmm.
So it's getting all those things together and getting everybody internally to agree those before you even take that anywhere.
Yeah.
And I like to work on the basis of, I like to help people with their identification. I think that sometimes, and this has been in my experience, and it's not a negative thing, you'll see with some companies, some of the ones that I talk to are like not just startups, they're 5-year-old startups. So the founder has got a Rolodex of people that they've worked with in the past. They've got some early success, which is great. They've got some deals and they've solved the same problem a few times. But the problem is when those contacts run out, for example, then they plateau. And then it's kind of like getting them to go again without them looking like, well, that was yesterday's news, or those guys were hot 3 years ago. Where have they been, sort of thing.
Hmm.
So the actual reinvigoration of something which seemed like a really good idea and was a good idea 3 years ago, how do you enhance that and go again and
Right.
make it exciting, new and improved and all those sort of things. So that's one of the things that I like to look at doing as well inside certain organizations.
It's interesting that when you mention almost the founder having a Rolodex of contacts they've sold successfully in the past, let's say past 3-5 years, and now their growth has stalled because they've run out of contacts. When you talk about creating something new, interesting, like I can understand that from a sales perspective, but surely the product needs that as well. So how, from your position, do you support the company identifying the challenge and then developing a product that solves that?
So on the technical side, I don't tend to get involved in that. What I want to do is I want to test the market parameters of that.
Hmm.
So there's a good example. If you look at the Graph marketplace, which is where
Hmm.
I work recently, Graph is great technology. I mean, there are some good Graph firms out there. The leader is obviously Neo4j. I worked for a couple of years for Tiger Graph. I really like what Graph does, but right now, market acceptance of Graph is around about 5%.
Right.
So you can dominate that 5%, and that's great, and that's where you get your growth from. The real challenge there is increase the market acceptance of the actual overall concept of Graph,
Hmm.
not necessarily the company itself. So that's one of the things when you look at the segmentation or when people are looking at who they sell to, what's the marketplace, who they compete with, how they are better than the competition or how they serve certain marketplaces in a better way, they need to have some kind of knowledge of that as well.
Right.
Because otherwise you could end up in a situation where you've got a great idea and going back to that point about the Rolodex running out, you've got a bunch of people, or say 10, 15 people that you can actually sell to that have the same problem, but when they run out, where do you go?
Yeah.
So that all comes down to, I mean, in a lot of ways, you can do that with solution identification right at the very beginning, or as you progress, if your solution is too narrow and you need to broaden it out, what are the other areas that you can actually stretch it into?
Hmm.
You can start with something like selling something narrow, like entity resolution, for example, and then you can broaden out entity resolution to being all of anti-money laundering.
Yeah.
So it can go from one place to another, but you just got to have a clear view of what those steps are and what it looks like.
From like a tactical perspective, when you're making this decision either to like enter a new market or develop a new product in line with what the market wants, how do you know what the market wants?
I tend to look for those things where it's very easy to get across the answer to a problem quite quickly.
Hmm.
I tend to work best in environments where the elevator pitch is 2 floors. So you can actually, it doesn't take you 12 floors to get the pitch across. Where you can actually sit down next to somebody, um, let's just say you're in a waiting room somewhere, you can sit down next to somebody and have a cup of coffee, and they'll say, "Oh, what do you do?" And you draw it on a napkin and hand it over to them. I like scenarios like that, and in that respect, I'm very much. I don't mind people being very broad, and I don't mind words like platform, and they're all very helpful, and they've all got their place. Where I
Mhm.
find it useful to get traction, certainly for young companies, is when instead of being a mile wide and an inch deep, they're an inch wide and a mile deep. So
Yeah.
three or four, five things really well, and then they actually do that again and again and again. But it's got to be really easy to explain, and you've got to be able to demonstrate you can get your money back. Give you an example. Right now, I've got a fractional role with Monitor. Monitor is a very simple proposition. If you have an FX exposure, and I use an example of 20 million, for example, if you've got an FX exposure from a multinational organization and you're moving money around your company or trading internationally, generally you'll go to a bank or somewhere and get a forwarding contract, or you'll have a fixed rate. But what Monitor does is it understands the marketplaces um, with regularity, and by using the Monitor system, it doesn't predict what the currency is going to do, but it can actually tell you when it's going to be the best time for you to buy and sell currency
Right.
and move it around. Typically, companies that have got a 20 million exposure are saving 200,000 a year. That's quite significant.
Mhm.
So there's a significant amount of money attached to that. So when I talk about the three things, we know who we're going to sell to. Somebody typically who's got a currency exposure of over 20 million. We know who the champion is going to be. It's going to be the CFO because they're saving money. And we know when they're going to get their money back because the way it's modeled is we don't actually charge them anything until they've made some money, right?
Mhm.
So it's kind of like that. It's the ultimate quid pro quo because people can use monitor system for 60 days, and then after those 60 days, they'll save some money, and then they just pay us the fees around what they've saved.
Mhm.
So in a lot of ways, that's a great example of a go-to-market product because we're not looking for budget. Budget's created itself. We're not actually looking to change anything with the relationships they have with their banks because we don't get involved in the transactions. We just make recommendations on how they can be more efficient and augment the systems that they have already.
Mhm. So from this perspective, obviously now you have like a foundation of a go-to-market strategy. You know your segmentation, you know your value proposition. Talk to me a bit about executing on that. So how do you create a lead generation process, a sales process that helps you fulfill that demand?
So, I mean, it all starts with I've always worked really tightly with marketing.
Mhm.
One of the areas where I've seen it fall down is where they're all siloed,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, going back in earlier parts of my career, I had people come to me and saying, "Oh, we need more pipeline." It's such a bland, vanilla thing to say, right? We need more pipeline. Really? I thought we could do with a lot less. Like when they say things like that, I say, right, well, let's just work out what it needs to look like from inception to close, because it's all part of the same process. Marketing isn't a separate process from sales; it's
Mhm.
intrinsically linked, and I always want it to be intrinsically linked. So I like to get involved right at the very beginning with the messaging and what we're actually saying to the marketplace and the things that people can pick up. Of course, you're going to be realistic about what your incoming leads are going to look like, but it certainly helps when you've got your team outbounding and using the right tools to go and reach out to the target audience and have those conversations. So
Mhm.
that's the first thing. The second thing is jumping on leads as soon as they come in. I know it sounds a little bit old school, but it is something that I'm really strong on, is making sure you follow up very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, and then the third thing is I like to vacuum pack the sales process so you get rid of all the air, right? So if somebody says, "Oh yeah, we'll get back to you in 2 weeks," try to make that 2 days.
Mhm.
And we were very successful at doing this in the past, where I've seen sales processes which have taken 12 to 15 months, and we've managed to get them down to 5 to 6 months instead, purely by vacuum packing the process and getting people involved and offering the right level of support to actually get decisions made so that people can move forward quickly. A lot of that always comes back to ROI, to be honest, because there's nothing better than selling with a money ticket attached to it, um, especially from a CFO's perspective, and it helps all those other battles that you have with wallet share and all that sort of stuff, right? So,
Hmm.
because if you can create the budget from savings, then from winnings rather than savings, then you're in much better shape.
Talk to me a bit more about then going from 15, 16 month sales cycles to 5 or 6 months, like you said. How does that happen? What, what do you mean by getting rid of the error in the sales cycle?
I think it's some of the basic things like, oh yeah, well they're going to look at it in 3 months' time, and it's teaching the people to say, well, the reason they're saying they're going to look at it in 3 months' time is because they're not convinced. You haven't actually sold them the benefits. You haven't told them when they're going to get their money back. You haven't demonstrated why this is going to be compelling for them. Some very basic things in there, and you can actually engineer the conversation to get customer commitment a lot more quickly if you actually do the job right. And a lot of the time, I've seen in the past, and this isn't a criticism, it's just the infrastructure, especially inside some of the larger organizations I work for, the infrastructure didn't support um, that way of going forward. Certain large organizations were probably a little bit more assumptive that the fact that because of who they were going to get the deal anyway. Doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily work like that. Today's customer, especially today's buyer, are very, very particular about what they look at and what they buy. They try not to waste things. They try not to purchase, large contracts which are full of products that they're not going to use. And they're looking for value and ROI most of the time. And as long as you play to that, and as long as you actually, I always like to have the money conversation in the first conversation. I always like to say, what are the performance improvements and image benefits that you're looking to get from an engagement like this, and what would that look like for you? Because I always and that all of these things, when you add them up, tend to get an attitude on the other side from the customer side towards you that's going to give you an opportunity to do things a lot more quickly than if they were going to pontificate for a period of time because they're just not sure about what you're going to deliver.
Hmm. No, I completely agree, and that also then in turn flows back into the messaging, because once the prospective buyer or your customer starts telling you what it is they want, you can then flow that through to the marketing message to get more customers. I guess
Actually,
I guess from there, then you mentioned the third step is the channel partners and a partner strategy. So walk me through about how you almost identify who your ideal partner profile is,
yeah,
and how best to go into market through a partner.
yeah, and I think that there's a few. I mean, it's a very good point, right? So, I always like um, people to have the same solutions focus as you, to have a business plan, to have a marketing plan, and partners they manifest themselves in various different ways. If you're a small company looking to scale out, it's much better and much more efficient to find people in proximity that are going to be able to represent you properly, right?
Hmm.
Got to have skills in place. They've got to be able to pick up um, and adopt the same attitudes. You almost be your organization in that territory. That's one side of things. The second side of things of partnering would be, where are the opportunities to actually cooperate with a company that's already been successful in a repeatable fashion.
Hmm.
So, and and that scenario is slightly more difficult to find, but when you find it, it's very lucrative. For example, if you find an organization that's, say, um, seeing customer churn of 15 to 20% a year, why is that churn happening? Is it because they've plateaued on the value that they can deliver because they're not building any more products? They're actually satisfied with their customer base, and the churn is increasing because they're being left behind by competitors. So if
Hmm.
you've got something that enhances what they do or is complementary to what they do, for example, it's almost like if they've got something that is functional, but it isn't really efficient. That's like having the square wheels. Square wheels work, right? And they're especially good for going uphill because they don't roll back down, but they're not very efficient. They're not very
Yeah.
fast, and they're very uncomfortable. if you can actually replace somebody's square wheel with one of your round ones and create a scenario where you're making improvements to their customer's experience, that will be a successful relationship,
Hmm.
be a successful partnership.
Something that I've seen from my experience at Gartner and helping clients develop a partner strategy was around the partnership stalling because it's hard to educate the partner on your product and on your sales process and convince their AE to tie you into the deal and things like this. How do you get over that?
Uh, on the partner side, yeah. So, I mean, there's the reward side first and foremost. Is it
Hmm.
going to be lucrative? I mean, specific examples. I mean, you've got to sell it to the A as if you're selling it to a customer,
Hmm.
right? And I saw this before. I've seen this in organisations in the past where you've got A's who are very 100% focused on selling what they had in their kit bag, and they just about got to their number by doing that. I had the experience with my team, especially at Sybase, where I asked them to take partners into their accounts.
Right.
And the ones that really got it, really did well, got to their number with the partner, and everything else they did directly was on top. So they literally slaughtered their number.
Hmm.
So you only need to, if you've got, say, 10 AEs, you only need one or two of those to smash it out of the park with a partner, and the other ones very quickly wake up. That's the
Yeah.
kind of draconian way of doing it, if you like. So, making sure that success breeds success. I think that you've just got at the get go, you've just got to be really strong and confident about how you're going to enhance that AE's opportunity and their chances of closing business with you,
Hmm.
rather than them seeing you as an obstacle in the way of them getting to their target. And you've got to each one of those situations is pretty individual, but I think to be aware of that from the beginning is really important.
Hmm. You mentioned in your example churn, and just the example was like 15-20% churn. Partner can help you fill that. I guess moving on from new revenue with net new clients to then building a sort of stable renewals process, how do you balance between net new growth and renewals, and what really needs to happen to
Really.
ensure that you're getting renewals?
Well, first and foremost, when you get a new customer, it's imperative to get them into production as quickly as possible.
Hmm.
You've got 6 chances to do that across the year, and they're all in 2 month chunks, right? If you get somebody in production in phase one, which is the first 2 months, you've got a really high chance of renewal, and you've got a very good chance of expansion.
Hmm.
If you wait until phase six, which is like 10 to 12 months, you've got a real risk that that customer is going to churn. You've got no chance of expansion. So first and foremost, you know, and when I worked at Salesforce were incredible at doing this. Their customer success team, they literally, if they got a new client, they wanted to be there 9 o'clock the next morning, getting that customer into production or trying to get into production because it was that important. And I think that that is the first step that any company has to address. If you get a new client, get them into production. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, what are the other opportunities inside that organization for you to expand? If they're strong, you need to make sure that your internal references are strong as well, because that then opens up the opportunity for you to go and get more revenue inside the organization. And I think that when to go back to your question about what's the balance between net new and customer success, or sort of like renewals and stopping churn, I think for me the priority is always going to be getting new customers into production, and then getting the right people to look after those customers after that. Whether you have some people prefer to organize themselves by having a net new business team and a customer success team. That's actually okay. I think that there's a balance to be had where when you get somebody on board and you build a relationship with that customer, and you're more likely as an A to get an expansion out of that customer than somebody else, then you need to look at that as well.
Hmm.
Teamwork is a good compromise for that, and making sure everybody's involved for the success of that customer. But The other thing is, um, existing customers breed new customers. And what
Hmm.
I mean by that is have a new story every month. Every month have a different or brand new story to tell. Even if it's for the same proposition, the fact that you've got another one and another one and another one breeds confidence in your marketplace, means that you're not actually going back to the same person multiple times a month for the same reference, and it becomes old quite quickly.
Yeah.
um, come up with new names, even if it's the same story. Doesn't matter about it being the same story. Just sort of like have stories to tell, and that helps. And that helps the net new logo process. So you've got to build a culture inside your organization, I think, where um, you connect all your success parameters. You
Hmm.
connect your ways that you actually see success manifesting itself and building itself out towards the next generation of your customers. And then always be planning ahead for if if you're going to actually need to actually expand out into a different area or another problem to address, make sure you've got the capacity to be able to support that financially with what you've banked already with the existing client base. It'd also be nice to sell new propositions into existing customers as well. That's
I
always
guess
quite.
from the customer success side, and you mentioned sort of building that culture of, you get the new client, you put them into production, you want them as your references, you want the opportunities to expand. And then from a sales side, obviously, you know, salespeople are motivated by hitting their number, hitting targets, making money. What other facets of building like a high quality sales culture are there, and how do you do that?
I think that I like to have what I call stealth mentality, right? Or siege mentality, I should say. A siege mentality. I like people. When I'm in a company, we did this at Sybase. Sybase was a very good example. Um, we when I was there, we were kind of seen as fourth in the database RDBMS marketplace, behind the big names that you typically expect to see.
Hmm.
Um, but we had this culture of if we weren't invited to the party, we'd gate crash it anyway. And if we
Okay.
gate crash the party, we'd win. Right? So we all got to everybody had that same um mentality of we will get in, whether it's through the back door or the front door, and we will make sure we can actually close our business in the way that we need to. And I think that I like that together. I like that togetherness. I like that feeling of everybody moving in the same direction. I like everybody. You could stand anybody up in that sales team. This is when I was UKMD there. Any of those salespeople could stand up and come out with the same attitude, the same story, the same level of success, the same way of execution, the same issues that they had getting in front of the customer, the same satisfaction that they got from closing a deal, even though they were behind in a race to start. Creating that kind of mentality inside an organization is really strong.
Hmm.
It's like really strong, and having the right culture in your team of togetherness, I think, is really important. And I
How,
always look for that. I always look
and
to drive.
like, how do you do that? Does that come down to hiring, or what needs to go on day to day to enforce that culture?
I always look for that when I do hire. I don't necessarily hire on like skills or history. I hire the person. I hire
Hmm.
on. I look for tenacity and I look for attitude and I look for strength of character in those sort of areas. Somebody's going to lead, and
Hmm.
that leadership as far as those is concerned, and it's because you want people. I look for a certain person that's going to have that kind of siege mentality, if you like. That we will win at all costs. We will try our hardest. But at the same time, they don't do it on their own. If they get stuck, they bring people in the team.
Hmm.
All these cliches about we all win together is very true. You can't do anything on your own, and I don't really like bringing in people that are trying to like do things on their own because
Yeah.
it's okay if they succeed, but nobody likes to fail, and failing on your own is a very lonely place. People do get things wrong. People make mistakes. Of course they do. That's life, right?
Yeah.
But we all do it together. So nobody does it as an individual.
No, definitely. That's something that I saw as well. And then with like the challenger sale, like the lone wolf and this kind of thing, you do need to have some aspect of having a team together. I guess I'd love to understand a bit more about when you're dealing with smaller companies that are facing established competitors. You mentioned that, and you mentioned going through the back door. I'd love some tactics on that. What have you seen that's worked well? What's some like innovative ways to reach a prospect when you can't go through the front door?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like you've got to find that the persona selection is very important, right? And there are several tricks you can use. You can actually do a search on, LinkedIn Sales Navigator. If you're selling an AML solution, you can look up who's in charge. I mean, the basic thing is to look up who's in charge of AML, but
Hmm.
also look at who's moved jobs recently and then gone into a new position because they're going to be looking to potentially make a name for themselves, right?
Hmm.
The status quo. It's about finding that person that's gonna have that little bit extra,
Hmm.
gonna actually think outside the box a little bit, especially if your solution is competitive plus. So what I mean by that is, yeah, it can do all the things that one of those large organizations does, but it does it in such a way that it's much much better. So
Hmm.
um, you've got this whole paradigm in AI right now of the amount of companies that are actually out there.
Hmm.
One of the things that I've certainly been exposed to in the last few weeks is around things like hallucination of LLMs,
Yeah.
which currently is a thing, right? And it is a
Yeah.
big. So if you're not careful, large language modules, and I'm not speaking out of turn when I say this, can show bias, and if they show bias, they can actually then give a false result on certain
Yeah.
in circumstances. So I've been working with a company that actually alleviates that problem, doesn't have that at all.
Wow.
So, and again, one of their points of manipulation could be when these regulatory bodies give out instructions to say, well, if something isn't going to come up to this standard, you're not going to be able, you shouldn't use it, or you're not going to be able to use it. That's an opportunity for somebody else to come diving in
Hmm.
around the back door where they then see their opportunity and then, manipulate that.
100%. I guess as a final question for me, I'd love to understand almost what emerging trends you see in the future of sales and where you think buyer behavior is going and just the procurement of technology as well.
I love all this argument about AI replacing people in sales. Don't think that's ever. Well, they can try to replace me if they like. That'd be quite good. That would be quite an interesting exercise. I think trends. Do you know the whole communication thing? What I've noticed is the amount of stuff that I get in my inbox now that's bland
Yeah.
because people stop making an effort. They stop personalizing things. And when you have to get AI to personalize things for you, I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do. I think the trend has gone back to mass marketing, spaghetti at the wall, that sort of thing. And if that's what people want to do, that's up to them. That's fine. I find that the more successful results, I like high ratios of success,
Hmm.
right? So I'm not comfortable saying, yep, we sent out 1 million pieces of communication, we got 0.5% result.
Yeah.
That doesn't work well with me at all. What I want to see is I want to see a high level of success and then improve on that piece. If we're sending out 1,000, I don't want to send more than 1,000, but I want the 1,000 to be more efficient when it comes to close. Don't want it to be
Yeah.
one. I'd like it to move from 1 to 10, 10 to 20, 10, and then. So I think that whatever the trends are at the moment around automating processes and um, in my mind, SDRs will never be replaced. I think you've got to have that human touch in a lot of the things that you do.
Hmm.
Good SDRs are worth their weight in gold to any organization because number one, their work ethic is huge, right? The
Yeah.
amount of time their resistance to rejection is the highest you can possibly imagine, um, and that needs to prevail. And also their tenacity, and I think that what I want to see when I look at any of these trends, any of these things that are coming forward right now, I still look for tenacity in a team. I
Hmm.
still look for people who can think laterally. I still look for people that aren't afraid to go off and do their own thing, and then come back with an idea that might have worked. I really like all that. So when you look at trends, am I afraid of anything right now? Not really. I think that
Yeah.
there's a lot of distractions. I think that this AI market is going to go through that hiatus that we expect it to, of a third, a third, and a third. I think a third will unfortunately fall away, a third will be acquired, and then there'll be a third left. And then what happens to them? You'll see the top 10 organizations like build up their stack, if you like, of AI and ML to a certain extent, and then
Hmm.
there'll be enough room for others that have got compelling technologies that people are going to use and get their money back.
Yeah.
That's where I see it going. And then when these other markets start to come in and take over from that, it's going to be really interesting.
100%. And just with that AI piece, I think obviously like there's an opportunity with the technology, but it being a distraction presents an opportunity for companies that aren't dependent on using AI for their outreach and kind of going meeting people, having an actual personalized experience with someone rather than like, congrats on getting a new job. Do you want to buy my software?
I'm still a little bit old school when it comes to things. I mean, I've got I've built 5 or 6 communities now on LinkedIn successfully with a partner organization that I bring in to do that. And I still there's nothing wrong with a good old meetup,
Yeah,
right? You get 90 people who are in a community of 800, but 90 of them are in London, have a meetup. So it's, if 10 show up, you get the chance to actually talk about what you do, and you get the chance to judge whether it means something to somebody. And 9
100%.
out of 10 it does. So as much as I love all the, I don't get me wrong, I do like digital marketing a lot.
Hmm.
I'm not a fan of inbox spam.
Yeah,
Uh, I'm not really a fan of email that much, to be honest. So I do prefer to do most things instantly these days.
yeah,
Um, and that kind of marketing, instant in or out response, is probably high volume. But people that get to me tend to write something a lot more personalized than something that's vanilla. But we all
100%.
have our, right?
Exactly. Gary, really appreciate your time on this one. Thank you so much. I learned a lot.
David, pleasure. Thanks.
Cheers.
Speaking soon. Cheers.